So welcome to the Gift of the Struggle. I am here with two very exciting guests because we have all three of us, been through a little bit of a thing together, even though we have never met. So I'm here with Jarret Dapier, who wrote Mr. Watson's Chickens, which was the center of our little controversy down here in Alabama and others across the country, and speaks to a much larger picture of what's going on in the world today. So in addition to that, he's written Jazz for Lunch. He's got a book coming out that's in pre-order right now, The Most Haunted House in America. When he's not writing, he is a young adult librarian with more than 10 years of experience. We also have Andrea Cerumi. Andrea is an author, illustrator, and cartoonist originally from New York, who's now living in Philadelphia with their spouse and dog. Written and illustrated books including Accident, Crab Cake, and I'm On It. Both of them have websites that are attached to their names, and you can look up and find all of their books and creative endeavors there. So welcome to the Gift of the Struggle, guys.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. We're really happy to be here and to be able to connect with you.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of both of you. And I think it's Mr. Watson's Chickens is kind of how we met. So my local library had someone complain that it was in the library and wanted it removed. So I went to bat for keeping it in the library, and unexpectedly we had a victory. They did not ban it, and they did not censor it, and they did not label it, which were all things on the table. And I had Jarret write a letter for me along with 16 other people in our community that were very passionate about not banning and censoring books, and that books should be available to all in the library for all. So let's talk really quickly, Jarret, what made you write this book? Because you do not belong to the LGBTQ community, is that right? And so the premise of the book is basically a story about a couple who happen to be men who are overrun by chickens. The only consequential thing is that they happen to be men. If you substituted a woman for one of the men, nobody would have said a word. It was nothing inappropriate. It was nothing overtly sexual, nothing. It's just a story about being overrun with chickens. So what made you write that, and what made you create the characters as two men in a relationship?
So it came about very naturally in a couple ways. Number one, LGBTQ folks and issues have always been incredibly close to my heart. I would say going back as early as maybe 14 years old, when I think became conscious of bigotry and how the fact that I had queer friends and that, you know, the world did not treat them the way they treated me. Mm-hmm. And that really grew throughout high school, grew throughout college, becoming a really involved member of a really small independent theater company in college. Deepened it. We did a lot of LGBTQ themed plays that included a lot of characters who were gay. And I just worked with a lot of artists who were part of that community. Mm-hmm. And so really, I'd say I grew a deep love for a lot of people who identified as lesbian, gay, bi, or trans. And that has sort of, it's just settled in my heart as something that has just always been a natural part of me. And, you know, into adulthood, I then became friends with, very, very close friends with folks in Chicago who, one was lesbian and one was a gay man. He subsequently passed from complications related to AIDS. Mm-hmm. And my friend who was lesbian died early in the pandemic from from cancer. It was stomach cancer, but I still I view her as also a victim of COVID as well, because she was not able to access care that she could have otherwise. Mm-hmm. And the onset of the pandemic really intersected with 3 crucial months for her prognosis.
Oh, yeah.
So there's been loss, but also, you know, among folks who haven't passed on, people I still love and I'm deep friends with. So it's really just LGBTQ folks, people in that community have always been close to my heart and connected. I've been connected to them very closely. But the book itself grew from a dream that I had in 2017, where I dreamt that I was sitting in a first grade classroom and I was an author doing an author visit reading to first graders. And I was reading a book called Mr. Watson's Chickens. And I was reading specifically the scene where they lose all their chickens at the fair. Mm-hmm. And it was Mr. Watson and this other guy who was there helping Mr. Watson. So it was clear from the dream, like there were two men. I just knew one of them was named Mr. Watson. And I dreamt about some interactions with some folks at the fair, and some of those lines from the dream are in the book, which just to this day amazes me. And then I woke up in the middle of the night, wrote down the title, wrote down some of the lines I remembered. But then when I started working on it, I, kept asking myself, who is this other person? And so the book always featured two men. I very briefly, I don't think I even considered that they were brothers or just friends. Someone had suggested to me, oh, make them brothers. But I was like pretty clear in my mind that this was not another Mr. Watson. And so, I basically hit on it pretty early as I started developing the story that, they live together and they're in love. And, it can't just be about the overwhelming chicken problem. There had to be some stakes to that. And the stakes ended up being that one of them had gotten himself in too deep to a specific problem. This being a collection of chickens that was just out of control, and it was threatening their relationship. And so that really gave legs to the story.
The line, I love you more than I love my chickens, so I'll get rid of them, or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah. Mr. Watson loved his chickens, but he loved Mr. Nelson more. Without
exactly.
him,
yeah.
his heart would be a broken egg.
Oh yeah.
And so so it really did arise naturally. I mean, in terms of like my own feelings and connection to queer folks, but also naturally, as in like as natural as having a dream at night.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from.
I love it because it's just a natural part of the way you think. That everybody has a story. So Andrea, how did you get involved in illustrating this with Jarret, and what about the story appealed to you?
So like a lot of the way that I get work is that my agent, people will approach my agent, editors or art directors will contact my agent and say like, oh, I have a manuscript. Would Andrea be free or interested? Or, and I would get a chance to read it and, make a decision, based on that. And so Stephen sent me, Jarret, your manuscript. That heart would be a broken egg line, like really like grabbed me like right away too. But so like it was a really funny book. There was so much, I love making funny books. A lot of the stuff I do is comedy. Like the potential for like chicken mayhem was, off the charts. You're like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. Like I knew it was a good idea when like I started already like thinking of jokes and things that could be fun. And then also like I really, really got super excited to do a book about two cis gay men in a relationship, and to be able to also fill the book with like references to queer children's book illustrators and writers in the Lgbtq community that have been inspirations to me, and then other aspects of queer culture, and just really celebrate, just have this joyous celebration and representation of one small aspect of queer life, which is not like necessarily the focus of the book, but to be able to do that. So I was born in like 1985, right? And that's like right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. Like grew up, I remember intersecting with seeing that line of like what is allowed publicly to talk about and to depict with queer culture and what is not, and like what has always existed but just hasn't been able to be in mainstream. And I remember like they're still having an issue with the gay penguin book, the Tango Makes Three, like two penguins fall in love and have an egg. Like it's still like a consistently banned book. I learned about, I learned about a lot of like censorship, and like everyone kind of like, as you grow up, from a child to an adult, you become very, very aware of the rules and aware of like what is allowable and what is not allowable, and what is what is safe and not safe. And I, at the time, did not have vocabulary to identify myself as non-binary, which I do now, but it was something I was always kind of aware of, especially from my friends who were queer and my teachers who were queer. My art teacher, who I had and made a big difference in my life, was a lesbian. Like, you just, like, you pay attention as a kid and you observe stuff. Like, as my Spanish teacher, he's in a relationship with my mom's hairdresser. He's not out at school. Like, it's a secret. It has to be a secret. And like, the pernicious thing about systemic oppression is just how everyday it is, and how you don't question it until someone questions it. Like, you just learn the rules to, like, keep your head down. You're like, of course he can't be out at school. It's not safe for him to be out at school. And then, I think about that now and just think how horrible. Like, he's in a loving relationship with this guy who's also awesome. And what's wrong with that? Like, why is that such an explosive thing that he could lose his job, lose his, livelihood, lose his friends, lose anything like that? What is that? Who gets protected by these things and who is exposed by these things too? So, like, even like, 2020, I guess 2020, I was working on your book, Jarret. Like, in 2020, there are plenty of other books about queer people, not as many as there should be, of course, but had come out. The conversation has evolved in children's literature, especially with picture books, like early readers, picture books, younger forms of children's literature. This is not like the first picture book that features, a queer couple, not by a long shot. But I did have this moment when I wrote back to my agent being like, yes, I want to do this book, where I was like, is this going to be allowed? Like, is this going to be okay? And like, I think encountering friction, encountering moments like that in your life, it's interesting and powerful to be mindful of those moments and be like, okay, why am I thinking that? Why is that happening? And then think about what the stakes are. And the stakes are queer people allowed to be people? And are we allowed to be open about that to, like, everyone, youngest readers, queer people, queer kids, non-queer kids, everyone in the community? Queer people are people. Let's make the book. And I was really excited, especially because I, as an illustrator, get a lot of leeway and a lot of freedom in being able to suggest things and creating this world and building out this world of their house and where they would live and what they would look like and, what kind of clothes they would wear. And I really wanted one of them to be Asian because I'm half Japanese myself. And growing up, like, it's very, very complicated, but like, it's very hard to find Asian role models in media in general, but especially queer Asian role models. It's very, very, very hard. So Jarret was on board. Our wonderful editor, Taylor Norman, was on board. It was wonderful. And it got me even more excited to work on this story.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing because there's representation in the book that's beyond that. I think there's a character in a wheelchair. And so there's representation, intentional representation. You can see it, that it was so well thought out in that book. And I think that, the people who don't understand, when I was speaking to the city council, I said, if my child had seen a book that represented him, how much more normal would he have felt earlier? Mm-hmm. When you don't see anybody who looks like you, you are made to feel like you are an outcast or an outlier, not normal, and one of the comments from the panel was, sexualizing our children. And I said, well, actually, the only people sexualizing the children are you. Because, and as a parent of a gay child, that really ticks me off. Like, you are sexualizing him before he was a sexual human. Children at certain ages, if you listen, so I started interviewing a lot of LGBTQ people in the community a few years ago, just about their experience and finding commonalities or differences or what they've been through is in the South. And generally the stories follow sexual maturation. So my child says, in elementary school, I kind of felt different, but I didn't really know what it was. By middle school, I had figured it out. And by high school, I had accepted it as who I was. Now, whether or not he came out was a different story. That took him another couple of years, but it follows the sexual maturity of and the physicality. Children in 5th grade and below really aren't sexual. They might like a boy or a girl, but they don't really do anything about it, right? So I think you're putting a sexual connotation on them before they are mature enough to have one themselves. and to have identified what that is and who they're attracted to or who they are and those things. So I'm like, actually, I'm kind of offended that you are putting this sexualization on these kids who aren't old enough to handle it. And when my kids asked about the first time they ever asked me about gay people or whatever was when they watched Glee, and they were in elementary school, and one of them just said, "Hey, what's up with that?" And I said, "Oh, sometimes boys like boys and girls like girls." And they said, "Oh," and moved right along. That was the end of the conversation, because at that age, that was all they needed to know. And you don't make it into a big sexual conversation. You don't make it about anything but boys like boys and girls like girls, or boys like girls, or whatever, because at that age, that's all they know, right?
Yeah.
So what is important to both of you about representation? Because clearly that was something that you were going for. I mean, I know that it came from a dream and it was a very natural thing, but when you decide to go forth into the world with it, there has to be some intention about representation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
yeah,
where
for
was your
sure.
mind on that, Jarret?
I think that, number one, I want to say what you just said about adults sexualizing children, especially through this fight against books that they want to remove, is such an important point, and it is so spot on, and it's something that I think is apparent everywhere, and you see it in bathroom bills, you see it in the language that people use, trying to dehumanize kids who are gender nonconforming or who are trans, and it absolutely stems from the adults who are projecting, and there's a lot of disturbed thought behind a lot of it. There's a lot of I think disturbed psyches behind it, and then like I always say with people when it comes to censorship, a lot of censorship stems from something inside a person that's even deeper than the bigotry that they're showing on the surface. And it could be about something entirely different deep down inside them, but this is how they're expressing it, and it's absolutely unacceptable. But when it comes to representation, I feel like I, number one, could listen to Andrea talk about how they made the book all day and what Andrea thinks about it, and why it looks the way it does, because it was a dream come true for me to see. Well, for one, as soon as I keep looking back here because I have Andrea's books back there, but I'm gonna like knock a million things down if I if I grab them. But as soon as we saw Accident by Andrea, and I saw Andrea's penchant and talent for depicting mayhem, I was like, this is it. This is the illustrator. We have to have Andrea. But it was an even more, and Andrea, of course, captured wonderful chicken mayhem, but it was an even more just ideal pairing, I think, because of so much more that Andrea brought to it, specifically the things that they just talked about. But when it comes to representation, I think it's crucial that children's books, and especially picture books, normalize. I was saying this last week that I don't. Of course, the word diversity is very important. Human life is diverse. I've been thinking about the phrase, if you've met a person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I was starting to think, I wonder if you could apply that to basically everybody. You've met one human, truly, if you were to truly investigate who that person is and their experiences and how they've been created to be the person they are. That said, the only problem I have with diversity as a word is just, number one, the way it's being weaponized.
Yeah.
And also that by weaponizing it, it flattens the sort of depth and complexity that the word represents. So I've been starting to say, like, I want picture books to normalize and celebrate humanity. And that's just another way of saying normalizing and celebrating diversity. And so, yeah, I could have just thought, oh, that's kind of cool, but yeah, they're brothers or just friends, and this is a buddy helping another buddy with his chicken problem. But it didn't go that way because I wanted to write something. I was writing something with love, and but when it comes to and so the relationship naturally grew out of that. But yes, representation was intentional because I thought and this is sort of like the flip side of what you said about adults sexualizing children, is it's the opposite that's going on in this book. It's showing two people who are in love, which is natural and normal, and who are reacting to an overwhelming chicken problem in the same way that a couple that was heterosexual, but one person's trans and one person's cisgender, or a lesbian couple, or just a cisgender heterosexual couple would react to this many chickens in their house. And so kids seeing two loving people dealing with an quote unquote everyday thing, to me was very, very important to try and achieve, because when kids at 3, 4, 5 years old see a story, and here's just the fact of the matter, it's two people who are living together and in love, and here's the real story, these chickens, I think that it helps children to grow up to be more accepting and loving and just understanding that humanity is diverse and always will be and should be, because it's beautiful.
Yeah, I absolutely think you're right. And I think that children aren't the ones doing this. Children learn this from the adults who are doing this, clearly. And when you say something like, sometimes boys like boys or girls like girls, they don't react because they don't care. They're just thinking, oh, okay, I get it, move on. But you know what you say about diversity is so interesting, because and if you've met one human, you've met one human in all their experience. When Luke went away to college, he joined all of you. He took a bunch of social classes. So it was like Black and the Black experience and gay experience, or several different ones. I can't even remember all the titles, but they were forward thinking, nice classes that you could only get in college. And so he ends up in a bunch of groups of people that are diverse, and a lot of LGBTQ people. And in Spanish Fort, Alabama, nobody comes out till they leave. So his community was zero, really, until he left. So he calls me up one day from school, and he's like, Mom, I met all these gay people and I don't like them all. I said, well, I don't like all straight people. Luke, welcome to community.
Yeah.
And I think he thought his worldview was so limited in his experience that I think he just thought, well, we're all in the same boat, so we're all going to get along and like each other.
Right.
And some of them were jerks, just like anybody else. And I was like, well, welcome to real life. But it cracked me up. I was like, poor Luke just thought every gay person was going to be his best friend, and some of them were assholes, just like everybody else.
Right. And one thing, Andrea, I think you could maybe speak to this, or I'm sure you have memories that you can talk through. I was just thinking about something that you said, Andrea, about homophobia being sort of in the air, or in the air you breathe, especially as we grew up. I was born in 1979, so I came of age early 90s. I loved coming up in the early 90s because of the music, because I am a musician and was obsessed with it. But I'm trying to write something that is about teens in the early 90s. And I was brushing my teeth last night, and I was thinking, is it even possible to realistically depict high school in the 90s without constant homophobia being part of the dialogue? It wouldn't be realistic if it wasn't. And it would almost need to be an author's note or something if I didn't want to write that or make it part of it. It's almost like a disclaimer would have to be like, this isn't actually realistic, because it was constant. And when that becomes,
it was constant. I was born in 1971, so I was a little bit even before you, and it just wasn't something that was talked about ever. Like years later, when Facebook came out, we were all like, oh, that guy's with a guy, that guy's with a guy, that girl's with a girl. You had a clue when you were in high school, but nobody ever would have said a word about it.
And there were 100 different reasons I was, people called me gay or bullied me or called me the F word. And it was constant from, 7th grade through 12th grade. And then when I got to college, of course, I found a community that was way more open and inclusive, but it was everywhere. And so one way with children's literature is you normalize by showing that this is that everybody's got a story, and this is just a normal part of being a human, and not something to diminish. But,
I mean, Andrea, what are your thoughts on all of that you just said?
I have so many thoughts.
Yeah, I know.
You both have
Comes
covered
a
so
lot,
well.
right?
It's really interesting. I think the thing that I'm thinking most right now is just how systemic oppression, racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, xenophobia, it's about power,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because, Asian people, Black people, Indigenous people, disabled people, queer people have always been people. They have always been human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been ones who have been really lovely and personable. There are people who sometimes get salty, and then there are people who have been very terrible. They have always been human beings, and they are human beings, and they will be human beings in the future.
And you're not going to like them all.
And you're not going to like them all. That's true now. That's true in 1910. That's true in 1795. That's true in like BC 600, right? And that'll be true in AD, 3600, whatever. The power, and everyone's always existed, right? But where the power comes into play is who is allowed to be on top, who is allowed to be desirable and comfortable and welcome. And it's very much, again, about power. Is like, who is welcome in a space, who is helped, who is assisted into a space, who is seen as an aberration, who is pushed out, who has 16,000 chances to screw up, and who has like -5 chances to make one mistake. The power of just having like queer people exist in picture books and have like normalizing like when you exist is fighting back against that oppressive move that is like your experience, Jarret, growing up, and your experience growing up, Elizabeth, which is that rule that was hammered into the culture so much that it just saturated everything, became life, which is like, you are not able to be openly queer and be safe, right? So anyone who is challenging that rule like gets slapped back down, sometimes often violently, and that's reinforced in lots of different ways, big and small. So like we're talking about censorship, talking about representation, talking about diversity, talking about all these things is talking about power. It's talking about violence. It's talking about aggression. And it is, it seems like very simple on the face of it, like it's a picture book about shit cans, and it is. Like it is. And it is a picture book about these two particular cis gay men who exist in a universe of other people who are different from them, right? Mr. Nelson is particularly Mr. Nelson, Mr. Watson is particularly Mr. Watson, and they exist, and then that's okay. That is allowable. That is normal and human, and that's why people are coming for it, right? Like that is why people are smashing down on that.
Well, and they're the people of the vein that they think life is pie, and so if that group of people over there has some power, that means I have less power,
right?
And we're not going to share, and I'm not giving it to you. And
Right,
and I saw a lot of that in that city council meeting. That you could tell that was part of their mentality. And you talk about when you speak out, it was one of the most misogynistic things I've experienced in a long time. A lot of head patting, like, oh, well, we're not going to ban it. But I knew what the woman who filed the complaint had requested that it be removed. So that was what was at issue. And they were trying to deny that was well, we're not banning any book, and you're in the wrong meeting, and you're this, and you're just one of them came up to me afterwards and said, your letter was just so aggressive and so strong, and you use the word bigot, and you're just shooting your own argument in the foot coming out so strongly. And I was like, I really didn't think it was that. I mean, it was matter of fact, but it wasn't enraged or anything. It was just, here's what I think, and here's the policy of the library, and here's what I think you should follow. And the head patting and the she doesn't really know what she's talking about. It's okay. It's okay. You're just too aggressive. I was like, oh God, come on. Let's focus on the actual issue at hand. But that's how they try to steal the power. So I'm speaking out. They're trying to steal my power by diminishing the value that I bring to the table and the knowledge and experience. And the woman there that I told you before we went to record about the woman, she got up and was crying because she just couldn't believe that this was what our community wanted for our children. And as a Christian, she just couldn't believe this book was in our library. And that was her whole argument, really, was this tearful religious argument.
Right.
And she was a retired teacher. So I can't quite figure out what power she was trying to maintain through that. I guess her religious power of lording it over everyone else or forcing it down their throats. But I got up and I said, I wanted to direct it at her, but I figured that would be bad. So I directed it to the city council. And I just said, the scariest thing for a parent of a gay child is a teacher who would condemn them. Mm. And I went on to describe some of the things we had been through in our community. And afterwards, she came up and said, thank you for your perspective. And I was like, oh, well, that's nice. And I said, well, this is not okay that this is happening. And she said, I'll pray for you. And she started to reach toward me and I backed up as fast as I could instinctively. I wasn't doing it on purpose. And I was like, we are really happy, but thank you for that. And then she gets to, well, that bullying and that hate, he shouldn't have had to experience that. And I said, well, you're right. And I hope that if he were your child, you would be standing here doing the same thing I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And she didn't respond to that, but walked off. And so I'm hoping that I want to believe the praying for us was praying for the things that we've experienced rather than praying the gay away. But I suspect it was praying the gay away. But it was such an interesting thing. And I try real hard to talk in a way that people can receive it so that you don't get ragey or aggressive or any of those things, because I think that's counterproductive. And I think if you can get to the bottom line of humanity, like what is the base? I've been in conversations with very vocal homophobic people, and you can usually get them to agree that we don't want these kids to die. I think that's a very low bar to step over. But if that's where we have to go to find commonality, I will go there. We don't want these kids to die, and these kids are dying. Mm-hmm. And so in the larger picture of things, with all the anti-trans things that are being passed, the censorship is going rampant across the country. The woman in our case said that she was going to move on to the schools. I don't know if she will continue since she lost this one, but she's like, I'm sure there are these books in the schools. And this was a public library. So that was her starting point. So what does all of this speak to? We've got so much going on. I feel like it's so impactful. And even my dad, who agrees with everything I did, said, what's the point? You're not going to win. Little did he know we did. But even he's tired and he's getting discouraged. He's 78 and he's just so frustrated with everything that's going on in the world. Yeah. But even he would say, why are you even doing this? Does it make a difference? And it does feel like a drop in a bucket, Yeah. So how do y'all see this fitting in? I think it's a catalyst for conversations like this, which are important. But how do we fit into this bigger picture of all of this anti-legislation that's going through for so many groups?
I think it's important to distinguish or to look at the wave of legislation, right, that is hitting across America. And I think it's striking because from what I've read about it, it's not a wave of legislation that parents have been like, hi, in the middle of the pandemic, by the way, there's all these queer books, like, can you get on this, legislators? Yeah. It's been like smashing through state legislatures and parents are like, wait, what now? Like what? Like we're doing other stuff. Like what? It's not necessarily, it's not a grassroots, like, please bring us the censorship legislation. It is coming from the top. It is national, it is funded, it is focused. You could tell that because a lot of the language that is being used over and over again to say, like, this book is pornographic, this book is blah, blah, blah. It's the same language, it's being cut and pasted, just moved throughout the country. And it's funded by, like, people at the level of the Koch brothers, like that level of funding. And it is a very, unfortunately, valuable political fundraising tool. It is a way that legislatures can stand up and be like, we have been effective at doing good, we have been effective at doing the legislature because we have got this thing for you. We can get behind this. And it is also a sign of, we have nothing else to offer you besides these culture wars.
Yeah. Well, and from what I've read too, along those lines, I think they think Roe v. Wade is in the bag. Yeah. And so the next big issue is gay marriage. I mean, that was something that was done and now they want to undo it. So it's all these dog whistles really to get this attention, to get the public funding.
And there's a real political benefit to Andrea, as you mentioned, it's funded at the level of the Koch brothers. And it's a strategy at the level of Steve Bannon, whose famous, strategy is flood the zone with shit. And
Mhm.
so you ram through as many things that are truly extreme and hateful as you can, and it makes the people who are working many jobs, have families, are in the middle of a pandemic, are just trying to get by, and would never agree to this. It leaves them with their heads spinning, and so they feel the benefit is the folks who would fight back are demoralized,
Mhm.
they're exhausted, they throw up their hands, they just look elsewhere, and you can basically ram through and keep going. And I think
Well, and the money factor too. I mean, I think one of the things, so I was in a meeting, we're doing a needs assessment for the LGBTQ community in the Mobile and Baldwin County, which is where I live. And so we had this whole meeting the other day on data, and it was all of the organizations who help. So there was an AIDS organization, there were two youth groups for LGBTQ kids, there was an adult nonprofit, several different groups. And then there were some individuals, and I'm like the Baldwin County loudmouth, I guess. So I'm in this meeting, not really affiliated with any particular organization, just listening. And there was a trans woman there who's a friend of mine. I did an interview with her, and she was on the verge of tears because this was all about data. How many do we have in the community? What are the needs that they have? What kind of access are they getting to the things that they need in life? And so it was very dry, it was just very data driven. And it's in the midst of right before Ivy signed the anti-trans bill into law here, and I think it was right after the Don't Say Gay bill was signed in Florida. And she was just like, what's the point? Like, why aren't we shouting from the rooftops about these legislations and the bills and all that? And had this moment. It was heartbreaking. And the woman who was leading the data discussion handled it beautifully. I thought. She said, we need to take a moment and acknowledge that the people in the room are feeling this way because it's valid.
Yeah.
But we need money. And the only way we can get money from the people who have it is with data. And it's a step that has never been taken where we live because we are so far behind socially, and Alabama's, behind on everything. But it's true. I mean, so we've got to take the steps to get the data that's going to get us the money, that's going to get us a foundation from which to argue, right? But how do we manage someone like my friend who was having this moment of just absolute desperation and devastation, that she feels like she's in jeopardy all the time?
Yeah.
So to me, there's this big gap between being able to make that progress and finding the money and the support that we can get to actually make effective change, and also dealing with the emotional impact to those who are being affected every day. And they can't wait 5 years for our groups in our state to mobilize and fundraise. So right. Do you have any thoughts on how we can bridge that gap? Or, I mean, I know we just have to go through the process, but it's incredibly frustrating and demoralizing, especially for someone who's trans right now.
Yeah. You asked something early on about when everything is so overwhelming, and we're talking about despair here. Like, what is the point? When all these things are being smashed through and keep coming back and smash, like, I should start by saying, like, I don't have definitive answers for.
Yeah, I mean, none of us do.
None of us do. But two things. You standing up in front of the city council, even if you couldn't even get in that door, like, say you couldn't even get past the door, like you were just standing up, even in your own living room or among your family or among your neighbors or among your school, community, and being like, this is wrong. You asserting that even as a single individual is powerful. And it is meaningful because your family member, everyone sees that. Everyone, like, your family sees that. The people in your community who are closeted see that. The people who are not queer in your community see that. And bad things stay every day until someone's like, this is messed up. like, let's stop. Like, we all accepted this like forever because, you know, it's been the rules and whatever. It's like the temperature. But wait, what is actually at stake here? And like, it's always people who are stopping and being like, wait, and even just for yourself. Like, I think about this a lot when thinking about like just overwhelming catastrophe and disaster, and what is the value if you feel like you are losing, or you feel like you're being beaten down all the time, and the exhaustion and the trauma and the grief, which I think your friend is speaking to with talking about your friend.
Yeah.
It matters, even if it doesn't necessarily do anything, to own your own truth and to just take the moment and be like, even if feel like I'm speaking into the void here, like, this is wrong and this matters. And that humanity, that the grief, the trauma, the humanity, the frustration, the, you know, like all of that stuff, I think it's so important. And it's so I don't want to make it seem that like negative things have to have a productive value in order to be meaningful, because pain is still pain, you know, like pain just exists as pain. But it inform, like the political movement, the power, the fighting, the struggle, that is informed from that core of humanity, and that is fueled by it, and it needs to be. But you can't lose sight of the humanity and the grief and the pain, and then what that is too. Like, there's room for both, right? Like, there is the spreadsheets that data is like, well, we can't like focus, like local groups will sometimes be like, we're not going to focus on the senator race this time, we're going to focus on local city council because we can push that through, and just like have defined political objectives too. But then also, like, there is the work that communities do among, you know, members who share those identities to save each other, which is to sustain each other and to hold each other and to support each other, which all of us have experienced in our lives in different ways, right? Like in moments of struggle, right? Who brings food over, who watches the kids, who walks your dog for you, who goes to the hospital and picks you up and drives you home, like all that stuff. Like, I think it's just it's meaningful because it's part of being a human being, and is one of the most beautiful things, the powerful things about being a human being is being able to like access and strengthen and you know, experience that those moments of humanity. And if it connects you with other people, or if it sets an example for other people so that they feel seen, or they bring new people into your life that, you know, weren't before, that is also important, you know. Or if they're, you know, like, things stick with people, right? Like years from now, like, we've all had moments in our lives, right, where like someone said something, and then like years later you're like, I always think about that moment. And then when you encounter a parallel moment in your own life, you're like, you know, no, I'm going to do this because I remember that happening, and like this matters. And like this, there's always, you know, big ripple effects in there too. But I think I love this, like it's a Jewish, I'm Jewish, it's a Jewish philosophy that was around in like the 1800s in Hungary, and like I don't know that much about it, but it's called the Moosa Movement, and it was this philosophy idea of like the rabbi who developed it was saying that I started out trying to save the world, and then I realized like it's too big, right? So I start with myself, and then I go to my family, and then from my family I go to my community, and from my community I go to my town, and from my town I go to the world, like outside in kind of thing. And I found that being very profound.
Sorry, I think, Andrea, you said basically everything. The only thing I would add is the marginalized, the vulnerable have never had the money, have never had the backing of power. And what has always overcome the brutality of power has been people connecting with one another and fighting back. And so the future isn't written. Andrea Cerumi, who runs the podcast Gaslit Nation, that I highly recommend for lots of reasons, always says that the future is not written, but it's really not written if the people who have morals and principles and care and love in their heart don't speak up for the things worth fighting for. And so to do the right thing, to speak up, to identify the things you care most deeply about, and to recognize that the fight is worth having, does have, as Andrea mentioned, effects, I think, that do contribute good to the world. It might not, but it rarely is seen immediately. And and in a lot of ways, it's like having faith or trust that it will. And part of that faith or trust is just knowing that you're spending your life fighting for something that you know is right, and we know is right. And I can't think of another way to be personally. That's how I've always been. But the future is definitely written by the powerful and the destructive if people like us don't raise our voices and fight back. I always think of seeds. That person who said to you during the city council meeting, oh, well, your son should not have been treated that way, but it's actions like the attempt to erase a story that very gently and almost just matter-of-factly presents a same-sex couple. That kind of erasure plants a seed of hate, and a seed of hate will grow and be destructive in ways we don't know. And there were probably all sorts of seeds of hate that surrounded your son and surrounded all of us that, led to your son feeling, unsafe, or just anyone feeling unsafe, or actually being attacked. No one deserves that. Yeah, no one needs to be attacked and killed, or no one deserves that. But to say, but, and try to add a caveat to it, that's you can't do it, because it's all one and the same. It's all connected. And so I like to think that we just, and Andrea, you talked about the fact that we plant seeds, like Greta Thunberg sitting outside the governmental body, just a single, I think at that time she was 11 or 12, with a sign. She may have thought, this isn't going to do anything, but it's all I can do. And as a result, her message spread across the globe. I think you just never know, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I think I used to have on the fridge the quote that the only thing necessary for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. And I've tried to raise my kids like that. That's how we lose the power. That's how we lose the fight, if it's good people do nothing. And hopefully, one of the things that propels me to keep speaking up is that I'm not going to let my kids see me not speak up. If I want to teach them that they need to stand up for what's right, or stand up for those who have less than they do, then I've got to model that behavior. And I think you're right, Andrea and Jarret, that the experiences you want to just be able to change the world. It's so frustrating, and so many injustices. But when you start with the one person, and you watch a change happen. There was a kid who was couch surfing, who was gay, and it was a gay Black kid, which is in Alabama even harder. And he needed a place to stay. So a woman from my former church that we left, who was not homophobic, called me and said, "Can you meet with me with this kid? Because I think you're connected with a lot of these groups." And I said, "Sure." He didn't know that we had a nonprofit for youth in the community. He didn't know that he was like 18 or 19. So he was on the cusp between youth and adult. And he didn't know about the adult nonprofit that we had in the county. He didn't know that we had a bar that had drag shows. His dream in life is to be a drag queen. He is the cutest little thing you've ever seen. So he didn't have a car. He worked hard. He was working every day. He's trying to get to his aunt's. So she ended up taking him in. Both of us had said we would take him in. She had more open rooms. We have 5 children, and with the pandemic, some of them were still back home. And so she had the space in the bathroom that he could have, that he wouldn't have to share. And but I said, "Call me and help me whenever. If you need help, I'll help you. Call me. I'll pitch in until you get a car." So one day he calls and he's like, "I need a ride to work. Can you help me?" And I said, "Well, I've got a work meeting. I can't do it, but my youngest son can do it." And he said, "Well, I don't want to make him uncomfortable." And I said, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, I've got a lot of drama. He was kind of flamboyant, he had this big, adorable personality. And I said, you know what? He grew up watching Drag Race with his brother, and you're with the right people. He is not going to be uncomfortable whatsoever. So you just put that out of your head. So then I have to go to my 18-year-old who's very shy and very quiet and doesn't talk to anybody. And I'm like, you have to talk to him because he's going to think it's about him. And really it's about you. I'm like, ask him about his job, ask him about school, say something so this poor kid doesn't think that you're uncomfortable. But that's the reality that he lives in. He is afraid that my child is going to be made to feel uncomfortable by his existence. And I was like, we are not going there. So the other day, I haven't seen him in like a year. He drove by me in the parking lot at the grocery store, and he's like, Miss Elizabeth. He's like, hey, Queen. He's in his big, exuberant personality. He's got a car. He's got an apartment. He's got a better job. He's working at a resort now instead of Domino's. So he's making a lot better money. He's happy. He's got his friends. He's connected with people that are in the same situation that he is, that are young, that need a little support and help, that need a community. He's found some people in that community. And so sometimes when I get down in the dumps about things like this, I just think, okay, that one boy, because we were able to give him a place to live for a limited period of time. And this is what he said that I love the best. When we were questioning him and meeting with him, I said, okay, I'm not assuming anything, but I have to ask, if you're going to stay with someone who has children at home, do you have any drug issues? Do you have any alcohol issues? And he goes, no, I'm just a good little Christian boy, gay boy trying to get by. I was like, you were so sweet. I want to just squeeze you. But that's how he saw himself. I'm just a good little Christian gay kid trying to get by. But the world doesn't see him that way. And if one person can reach out to one kid who's couch surfing and give them a place to live, he wasn't even there a year. It was less than a year. And it enabled him to save up for a car, to save up for an apartment, get a roommate, have a life, And a lot of these kids who couch surf don't have the opportunity to have a life because they end up homeless.
Yeah.
And their access to things. So I think if you have to focus on what you can do individually right now. And sometimes it's as simple as giving a kid a room to sleep,
Yeah. And what's so alarming about the rash of book bannings, especially the way they target trans stories and LGBT stories across the nation right now, is a lot of what you were just talking about, is that each one of us on this call, I think, have in our own ways and for different reasons developed a sharp sense of empathy, which is the ability to try and imagine the experience of others who are unlike yourself. And when you can do that, you are able to identify, for example, this young person being at particular risk for having a rougher life than anyone should ever have. And not just because they're a young person and don't know what they're doing, but because of, who they are. And you were able to imagine that and think through it and understand the stakes for this person, that the stakes were very high. And what's terrifying is that when we remove, when schools and school boards and citizens are acting to remove stories that allow other children and adults who might read them also, who allow them to be able to peer into, it's the famous phrase, windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors. The kids that kid that you took under your wing needs access to materials that help him see himself in stories, to understand I'm not alone. And all the people who are not like that person need to be able to read those stories, and should read those stories in order to see, wow, there are people who are unlike me who are deserving of respect. And there are systems that really threaten these people, and it's my job to understand that and also help out. And so windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, all of these are being shattered by book bannings. It's trying to create a monolithic culture, and that's always the way towards like inhumanity.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk to people on a human level, you realize we all want the same things. We want to be accepted. We want to be loved. We want to be valued. We want to exist. We don't want to live in fear of existing. I mean, it's the basic human needs that need to be met. All other things aside, we are all looking for the same exact things. So to wrap us up, because I could talk to you guys all day. So in the vein of the gift of the struggle, and I am with you, Andrea, pain can exist in and of itself to experience the pain, but also the way that I've tried to get through my life is to find the gift in the struggle. And what is it that I've learned, or what is it that I can help someone else through with my experience, and know that they can come out the other side. How is it that, one of the people in my life who has said something profound to me was that my son's doctor when he had epilepsy, and that was how this started with there's a gift in a sick child, but there are gifts in the moments that surround you and your family during those times. And the neurologist told me the only person who will ever disable him is you. And I have applied that to so many things in my life, not just sickness, but am I limiting a child with a rule that's arbitrary or not intended to protect? Am I limiting an experience that I'm having myself because I'm afraid of what's going to happen or what it is? So the only person who's going to limit me is me. The only person who's going to call him disabled was me, so am I not letting him do this particular activity to keep him safe, or because I'm afraid? So that was something that I think of almost every day. And I don't know if he has any idea that has impacted me that way. And that was a big gift in that struggle of him going through that particular illness. But I think it applies to so many things in life. So when you look at this world that we're living in and going through, and the things like when their book bans come forward, what is the gift that surrounds those situations for each of you?
That is a good question.
Sometimes it's hard.
Yeah.
You have to look for it hard. I mean, for me, it's meeting people like you and feeling less alone in a very red state where I'm trying to make a difference and feel sometimes like it's just hopeless. But to meet people like you who are in the fight with me, side by side, trying to make change wherever we are. We're in 3 different locations. That to me is comforting and inspiring. So that's sort of how I try to look at some of these things, the people that I get to meet and hopefully make a difference for. So I'm sure that both of you have similar experiences with fighting this fight, because this wasn't the first time this book is there's been an attempt to ban.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jarret.
I was going to say just that I feel the same way. The people that I meet, I've received messages from both librarians and young adults, like recently graduated from undergrad, who happened upon either my tweets or Andrea's about a couple of different situations this winter, and it meant the world to me to be able to connect with that person and just for the moment, connect to somebody I'd never met before and realize that. And I guess it's in that kind of moment that I see visibly that, speaking up does make a difference. And though these 2 people reached out personally to me, there have to be more. And so that's part of that is a gift, is to feel like community is being built. It just looks a lot different than what people think it ought to look like or how it looks. But yeah.
Elizabeth, one of the reasons I was very excited to talk to you today, besides just talk to you today, was I went into this podcast thinking I really want to meet this woman who's doing this work. I am so amazed and impressed, and just it so touches me that you are doing this work where you are. I have my identities, and I make books, and it is important, but also I am not there, and I am not doing that work in the same way, and I feel very impressed by you and grateful to you for what you are doing. It matters so much. It is inspiring to me that you are doing this.
I really appreciate that, because that's not how my community here usually feels.
I echo everything.
Go far outside of
I got to speak with graduate students in a children's materials class, library graduate students last week, and I told them all about you, Elizabeth, and part of the gift of having met you for me is that I've always been told by professors and just experts on intellectual freedom that censorship is fought back most effectively at the local level, and that people like Andrea or I, while things are being debated and considered, speaking up is often counterproductive unless done in a specific way. It really matters that local folks organize, or that there be one person who gets people organized, and that was you. And so part of the gift was A, meeting you, B, seeing somebody fight so hard for their child and for books and for the children in your community, having access to them, but also on a sort of other level, seeing firsthand that yes, it's true. Censorship and book bans are fought back at the local level, and here is a shining example. So thank you for that, for all of it.
Thank you.
It is a model and an inspiration and a reassurance too to a lot of other folks who've taken heart from like posting about what happened with you, that it is possible, because you read the news and it is 99% awful, right?
It's all almost negative, and I still can't get over that we won it. I think the city attorney had a hand in realizing that this was something they didn't want. Typically we're in the news down in our area for bad things. And so I think he just didn't want to go down that path. And he kind of took them by the hand, and they were all very angry that they had to vote that way, but they did it. And I'll take an angry vote over.
And that's an important lesson. A lot of city councils, a lot of library boards, a lot of school boards do not want to deal with protracted, loud, aggressive meetings. And right now, the right wing has the upper hand because they're organized, funded, and very, very loud.
Yeah.
And so another gift of this situation is it showed me, by you collecting those 16, 17 letters, binding them together, getting them to each member of city council, it's, like Andrea mentioned, a model that I've told other people now, do this work right now before there's a book banning. Look, see who feels just as passionate as you right now, so you have a network that can be activated when it comes to your town or your school.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's completely important. And I accidentally landed in that role, but I'm happy to do it. I needed a good little fight in my life this past month or two. So it was good. Well, I want everybody to be able to reach both of you and to take a look at all of the things that you've produced creatively. As a writer, I always appreciate getting the word of other writers out. So Jarret, where can people find you?
JarretDapier.com, and also on Twitter at Jarret Dapier, 2 R's, 2 T's, Jarret Dapier. Yeah.
All right. And Andrea?
I'm I don't think anyone else has my name. So if you can find my books in a library or bookstore, if you look up Tsurumi, which is Tsurumi, I will pop up. Or this one sewage company in Japan that also has the same
Which
name.
is clearly not you.
No, but I'm very curious about that. But yeah, my website is my first name, last name, AndreaCerumi.com. And I'm more active on Instagram because it shows more art at a Tsurumi. So please follow me there. Thank you so much.
I'm also on Instagram, and I should say I am more active on there. It just feels like a more welcoming place also.
Yeah.
At least within the network that I'm in there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I could, like I said, I could talk to you for hours. I think there's so much work that needs to be done, and it's helpful to talk to people who are on the same page with all that. So thank you for everything that you've done. And I look forward to talking to you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.